Hey guys, so I just want to say firstly a huge massive thank you to everybody who watched the first video I've done on this series, which was the Monte Cristo. It is absolutely nerve-wracking putting something new out there to the world. Like, I loved all your feedback and I loved all your comments, and this is just the second one into this series, so I hope it's just as good as the first one, if not better. And I'm sure with time I will get better at doing these. So for those that are new here, I have started doing a series that is Australian based, as I swear every time you look up these type of things, everything's over in America. So basically what I do is I just do my makeup. So in today's video I created this look and I just talk about the abandoned place with you guys. So some of these places are literally abandoned, or some of them have been like rebrought and refurnished, which is pretty cool because that means the historic building does live on and so many people can go and see it. Before we jump into the video, I just want to give you guys a content warning. So the topic in the video, there will be discussion in regards to experiences of previous patients that were in there, what happened to them, and also things regarding mental health, as we are going to be talking about a mental health asylum. If any of these may be triggering to you, I do suggest to click off the video. If you do enjoy this series though, make sure to turn that notification bell on so you don't miss the next episode. So before we get into it, don't forget to check out my Instagram page and also subscribe to my channel so you don't miss any more uploads. And let's get into it. Okay, so in today's video, I'm going to be talking about Mayday Hills, which is the asylum at Beechworth. Also, just to let you know, I did find a few articles that really didn't match up together, and some of the information was different like in each article. So I kept digging and I ended up finding an interview with Jeff, who is the current person, like him and his wife own part of the building. So I basically just tried to match everything up to what he was saying. In this case, some of the information could possibly be inaccurate, as there is so much out there on the web and it's so hard, I found, on this personally, because most of the records are still sealed due to privacy reasons. So it was quite difficult to be able to get in and find out a bit more. So basically I've just taken people's word for it in interviews and like their experience. So hopefully, yeah, if there's anything that's misleading or inaccurate, let me know down in the comments. I love your feedback and it's, yeah. I still hope you enjoyed the video. So the Beechworth Asylum is a place where not many people walked out alive between 1867 and 1995. It is said to be one of the most haunted places in Australia, and according to Jeff, it's one of the most places in the world. In the interview, Jeff did state that they do, I'm pretty sure they do daily tours, it sounded like. But mind you, this interview was a few years ago, so it's probably changed. And he said like there was at least one thing that happened in every tour. So if you went, you were bound to experience something. But keep in mind, not everyone does experience something. You can't just flick the button on and something happens. So in the mid 1800s, there were 3 institutes that got built in Victoria, Beechworth being one of them. I'm not going to mention facts about the other institutes. If you want me to, I can do that another time, see how they compare to each other. But this is literally just about Beechworth. So the asylum got built on top of a hill, and like everything gets I swear everything gets built on top of a hill. But the reason why it got built on top of a hill was because back then they believed that the wind that would come through would cleanse the patients of their insanity. I mean, kind of makes sense, but the other thing is back then you could literally be classed as insane for literally anything, which I'll get back to later on. But I just want to put out there, like, if I, you know, say, oh, this person was for this, technically, like, they probably weren't insane. But yeah. So I think originally they built the asylum to hold, I'm pretty sure it was about 250 people, but they ended up expanding, and at their peak it was recorded that they had 1,200 patients, which was 600 men and 600 female, and they also had 600 staff. Jeff actually spoke to one of the staff members, and they said at that time that they actually had closer to 1,500 patients. So I believe that once the institute shut down in 1995, which is actually crazy because that's the year I was born. So to think that it only, you know, closed down nearly 26 years ago, it's actually not that long. I believe that I think the government sold it to La Trobe University. So they turned it into a university for a bit, but then that got shut down in 2013. And then they sold it to two guys where they basically just parted the hospital. I'm pretty sure they subdivided it and just sold or leased off parts of the hospital. So Jeff and Dawn ended up buying 6,000 meters square. So I don't know since that interview if they've brought some more, because he did mention in the interview they wanted to expand, but I'm not too sure if they have or not, as I haven't been there myself. So, but 6,000 meters is still pretty big. I also, when I was looking up about Jeff and Dawn, I saw they wrote a book. It's called The Spirits of Broken Dreams. I'm not too sure if it's available to purchase or anything. The website I was on, I couldn't buy it, so yeah, I don't know about that. But honestly, I'm going to try and see if I can look it up a bit later on, because I feel like that would be pretty cool to read, as Jeff was saying that he's basically, I think he's like open-minded. If something happens, they basically debug everything. So if you heard a noise, they would go investigate and see if it could be like a live animal or the breeze or anything like that. So they debug it before they come to the conclusion that yes, it is something paranormal, which I feel like is pretty cool for people like me, like, because I don't know, I'm on the edge about some things. Like, some things I will hear and I'm like, whoa, that's really creepy, like nothing can explain it. And then other things I'm like, oh sure, that was, I don't know, a rat. So I'm going to continue talking about the hospital when it first opened up, and then I'm going to come back to the current owners and everything that later on. So the hospital was surrounded by roughly 108 hectares of farmland. So they were basically self-sufficient. They had their own like livestock, they had their own kitchen fields like veggies, fruit, all the food that you grow. And yeah, basically everything they had, they could do themselves. I'm pretty sure a lot of the patients as well, like quite a few of them had talents of their own, so they would use them to, so they would use the patients to like work at the hospital. So one particular cruel feature about the hospital is the ha-ha wall. And basically the wall is a trench that they built on the interior of the walls. It made the wall appear low enough for the inmates to think they weren't imprisoned, but once they got up to the wall, they actually couldn't escape. So according to Jeff in the interview, the ha-ha wall got torn down, or bits of it got torn down in about the 1950s. That way the safer patients were able to actually go into town, have a coffee, you know, walk the streets, be with the community. And I'm pretty sure the community were accepting it at that time. So, I mean, it's good that they were able to get out at that time. So for someone to be admitted, all you needed was 2 signatures, and that could be anybody's 2 signatures. So if you were a brother and you wanted to get your sister out of your life, just go to your mum or dad and tell them, I don't know, some crazy story, then go to the doctor or the police, convince them that the person's insane, and they admit them. Like, and you can, I'm pretty sure they could just say that they were happy to sign, and in they went. So, but to get out, you needed 8 signatures. And those signatures had to be authority. But even if they weren't authority, 8 signatures is a lot to get someone to sign you out of a institute. If that were me, I would be screwed, because I can't even find 8 bridesmaids, let alone 8 people to sign me out of an institute. Yeah, but basically people were in there for the long run once they were admitted. I also saw an interview with Jeff that on the wall there were pictures, and one of the pictures were like reasons as to why someone could be admitted, and there were a lot of reasons. So I took a photo of that for you because it's on the wall, and if you've been there, you've probably seen it, you've probably seen the reasons. But for the people who haven't been there, like, a lot of them are so absurd. So just to name a few, I couldn't believe a few of them, and it was things like falling off a horse, being dumb or lazy. And it also had other illnesses, not just mental illness, but it had others like asthma, dementia, epilepsy, like anything. If it was anything different from that type of society back in those days, you would, yeah, unfortunately you were most likely going to be admitted. So medicine didn't come about until roughly the 1950s. Back then they couldn't tell the difference between schizophrenia or epilepsy. I'm pretty sure they only had about 4 medical conditions back then, whereas today's world, I read on an article, if I remember where I read it, I'll link it below, but we have over thousands of medical conditions these days, which is understanding as to why in this day and age it sounds absolutely crazy to admit someone for all those types of things. But I still feel like falling off a horse is just ridiculous. So men, women, and even children were there, and they could spend either months or years in the rooms, and there was nothing in, I wouldn't even call it a room, it was like a cell, but it's not comforting. Like, from the sounds of it, it just sounds really heartbreaking when you see it in person. And all it has is just metal beds with itchy blankets, and it's just a tiny room. Depending on how insane the people were labelled, some of them would be confined to a padded room with a straitjacket, or shackles for company. So before medicine came in, doctors did use restraining methods against the patients. And as mentioned, it was things like straitjackets and shackles. They also done electrode treatment as well. By the sounds of the stories, it sounds like quite a few people, almost every patient, got shocked. So self-harming patients had leather mittens, and if they tried to bite or nibble their gloves off, they would have a tooth pulled. And if they tried twice, both their top front teeth would be pulled out, and for the third time, they would pull out all their teeth. So I'm not too sure how true that is, but that's crazy. The rooms in which the treatment shock happened seem to be where the most activity, like the most paranormal activity, happens. And if a straitjacket or shackles didn't work, then you would be put into an isolation box, which you would stay until you settled down. Now, I hope I pronounced this right, but it's called the Grevillea. I think it's Grevillea. Sorry if it's wrong. But everyone feared that wing, including the staff. And apparently, if you were unlucky enough to wind up there, then the chances were that your numbers were up. But before you died, you ended up being tortured, or you would end up being brain dead and deemed a cabbage. They felt nothing but pain and suffer for the entirety of that wing. There were over 3,000 deaths, according to Jeff in the interview, in that wing alone. I think in total there was over 9,000. And he said they were the ones that were recorded. So it seems like they were saying that in that area, there is a long hallway, and they're always long and creepy. But there have been a couple of people that have spotted a shadow down in the hallway. They see it there for, I think, like a couple of minutes, and then it just disappears. So not only were they slapped, punched, kicked, any of that in therapy, but in electric therapy, they would tie their wrists and ankles to the bed and their heads secured with a with a heavy leather belt, so they were completely unable to move. The electric shock would be put through their bodies and pass through the body, with their head being the input point. I read somewhere that after, like when they got the shock to their body, a few, like the bodies would either jagger forward or backward in a way that the bones would actually break, or they would shatter their teeth. Like, once again, it could be true, could not be true. So the children there were living their own hell in the children's ward. Some of the younger patients would never make it to adulthood, as their lives were taken from the hand that was to make them better. So the children were used to a beating, and sometimes they were beaten to death accidentally. The ones that did make it through childhood probably wish they hadn't, because then they got a taste of what it was like to be an adult in the institute. And the ones that did make it back home to their families that put them there in the first place, they were never the same again. This here is always the most satisfying part, I swear. Like, oof. So in 2015, a man named Alan Tiller had an experience in the in that same ward where the adults were, where he saw a little girl kneeling down in the darkness. He also witnessed doors slamming, heavy footsteps. He even caught a voice telling him to get out on a EVP, which is the electronic voice phenomenon. Apparently one of the most disturbing energies comes from the bullpen, which was a particular wing that housed aggressive, violent and disturbed people between 18 and 25. So I'm just going to go and do the other eye off camera, and I'll be back with more on the ghosts that are seen and the main ones that people kind of feel or see apparently. So I'll be back. So I'm back. So from someone's walkthrough, like the way they described it, it sounded like the laboratory, or what used to be the laboratory, is near the entrance, and that is where operations and autopsies took place. The first person to be cut open was William Whitehead, who was a former jail inmate who died within hours of the hospital opening. His death certificate states he died of insanity. Now, I'm not too sure if this next statement's true or not, but apparently the laboratory had a floor-to-ceiling bookcase with shelves that were filled with jars of body parts. And in the 1950s, when the restoration work was being carried out, the jars disappeared. It's believed that they got stored in the original cellar of the asylum. So Jeff said there is one main ghost in the asylum. Like he got asked if he knew all the spirits, and he said he didn't, which, like, there'd be a lot of spirits if over 9,000 people died. But he said one of the main ones that gets seen around quite a bit in the hospital and in a few different places was, or is, Matron Sharp. So she was known as a generous, like she was a generous person, and she's known as a generous soul. So she had a fair bit to do with the hospital when she was alive. She looked after, like, she was in charge of the patients' care, and she was also in charge of the female staff. So it was the nurses that used to see her around. Today, sometimes people like hear sounds in those areas, but I don't know if anyone's actually like seen her. So the nurses usually saw her in the Gravilla wing, which is where people got the shock treatment, and she would be sitting there with the patients, like taking care of them. Those who witnessed it said that it was like an icy cold feeling in the room, but her presence was comforting. So she's one of the friendlies in the asylum. Another woman that was there, she used to smoke quite a bit, and another patient actually threw her out the window where she did pass away because she wanted her cigarettes. And apparently because this lady was Jewish, her body was not allowed to be moved until Rabbi had seen it, which they were in Melbourne. So the body sat there for 2 days in that spot until they got there. People say that they have seen her ghost in the spot that she fell. There is a photo that somebody took that shows an orb in the photo, which I will put on the screen. There wasn't much on this other one, but there was a story that an 8-year-old boy also died in the hospital. He was in there because he stole a horse down in Melbourne, and he went in when he was around 8, and he passed away in the hospital when he was 80. So he literally lived there his whole life. This next one, Jeff mentioned a little bit about him in the interview, and his name is Tom Kennedy. So Tommy was a kitchen hand, and he was also the person that moved the deceased bodies from the hospital to the morgue. So he died in the kitchen, which it was hard to work out what room it is now. There wasn't much talk on the rooms or like much to find out on the rooms to see which was what. So Jeff said that the kitchen, like he died in the kitchen, which is now the foyer. Oops. So it's said that people have had sensations of what feels like someone tugging at their clothes, even tickling their ribs. And Jeff said that he does like to move stuff around, so I'm guessing like he has seen that happen. So I'm just going to mention one more patient who was a man that went missing. I'm not too sure how long he went missing for, like nothing really said. If you know, comment down below because I want to, like, it'd be interesting. I feel like it would be a while as to the reason why they found this man was because the resident dog Max was found chewing on a leg near the gatehouse at the grounds entry. Then a second search happens and that's when they found him in a tree. So his body had been there for so long that he decomposed and his leg fell down, and that's how Max found the leg. What's even creepier is what happened to the patients after their deaths. Now, once again, I couldn't find anything, like there was a couple of articles that mentioned this, so I'm not 100% sure if this is accurate. But apparently down in the basement of the hospital, doctors and unknown volunteer assistants would store the bodies in bags and then experiment on them. It's believed that some of the bodies were down there for months before they were laid to rest. And I mean, back then, who knows? Honestly, I feel like anything could have happened. They feel like it's mentioned that they could have possibly done like ritual stuff on them or black magic in a way of a thank you for their assistance. And apparently also devil worshipping and human sacrificing also happened in the basement. Now, I'm not too sure if this is the same spot or not, as I haven't been there, so I haven't seen the basement or like the cellar, whichever one you want to call it. I don't know if there's actually like a basement and then like an actual cellar underneath, because I know sometimes there can be one that is further underground. But Jeff and Dawn have an album, and album basically keeps photos and possibly like a little other things of scratches and other spooks that happen in the asylum. And yes, I'm talking about scratches. Like, who would have thought that you would be hearing about scratches on hauntings? Like, we now have ghosts that scratch people? What? So Jeff had recalled one guy that ended up having 2 sets of scratches on his back. So it was on either side of his spine, and it went from his shoulder blades down to his bum. Now, Jeff said that these scratches happened down the basement. Once again, I'm not too sure if it's the same spot as where the rituals and stuff happened, or if it's like a different area in there. So Jeff received about 10 different incidents where, well, okay, that made me lose track. So Jeff has received about 10 different incidences where they have been scratched. Some are just light scratches across the collarbones, and some have drawn a little bit of blood, but he said it wasn't like a lot of blood. Another one was that people, like, once again on people hearing things and stuff, like a fair few people said they've heard footsteps and Apparently there's been quite a few people who have heard footsteps. I think it's in the foyer, and I think there's like a stage and there's stairs behind the stage, like where the curtains are. He has said there's been quite a lot of activity there, and there's also in that same room, so I think it used to be a theatre, but now they've turned it into a foyer, and at the top there's a projection room which a patient, well, they're not actually too sure if he's a patient or if he was a staff member, but his name was Ralph, and Ralph used to do all like the films and stuff, like play them on the projector, and they still have like those old, I don't know what they're called, like I don't know if they're called cassettes or anything, but they still have those old films, and they have heard like someone sorting them out in the box, but no one was in the room, and Jeff described it as someone was like flicking them across the room. Okay guys, so that is the final look, and that is the end of talking about Mayday Hills. So Jeff and Dawn do tours over there. I'm pretty sure they sound pretty regular to what he was saying. You can check them out on their website or their Facebook, where you can book, which I'll leave in the description down below for you. So they do all sorts of different tours. They do the ghost tours, they do historical tours, photography tours. They have people come out to do like podcasts, or if they want to shoot something. There's all different things for each different person. So I really hope you guys enjoyed the video. Like I said at the start, there was so many different articles, and some of them didn't match up to each other, some didn't match up to what Jeff said, but I'm not too sure if it was because it was just an interview with him, so he probably wouldn't mention everything that happens. If there was anything missing or anything inaccurate, please leave it down in the comments below, so then that way I can let other people know as well. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and join us as we grow. And also don't forget to leave a thumbs up so I know if you enjoyed it or not. Also comment down below what you would like to hear next, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye!